Were you worried about being drafted while you were in high school?
I got drafted when I finished college. You know about the draft then, I guess, already. Yeah, that was something everybody had to contend with. But if you didn't know this, it was a lottery when I was in. It didn't start out as a lottery, but it became that. And so they had a lottery of 365 numbers, and I got 64, so that meant I was getting drafted. But I just graduated from college, and so I instead of just going into the infantry, I went down to the recruiters and checked out the Navy and the Air Force.
Nice. And what made you choose the Navy and Air Force?
What made me? Oh, I just decided maybe I could fly airplanes.
Yeah, I see the image of the aircraft. Is that a Corsair behind you?
That's what it looked like, flying over the countryside in Thailand and Cambodia. So that's where I was stationed when I went over there. It was in Thailand, and we flew into Cambodia. It's a pretty good little airplane.
What was your boot camp experience?
Well, so since I had a college, I could go to officer school. And so it was a little different than the guys that go in as enlisted men. So it was 90 days long, 3 months, and it was challenging, but we didn't have to. We had physical PT, they call it, physical training, and they made you do push-ups, sit-ups, and run a mile. I mean, that was about the extent of it. It's not like the grueling stuff you see about Marines.
Yes, definitely.
But it was good training.
Yeah.
Then they had classes on military history and I don't know, stuff like that. But it took 3 months, and it was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio.
I see. And what year was this about?
That was 70.
Okay.
Yeah, the winter of 1970, I think. So I graduated in 70, spring. Yeah, so that went across the winter, and then I was a candidate for pilot training also. Since when you go in to join, they put you through tests, and back then pilots were in demand, and they needed more pilots. Guess they were getting shot down over there in Vietnam or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, they gave you a battery of tests, and if you passed them, they put you in the line for a pilot training.
I see.
Yeah, but back then, you couldn't get into pilot training unless you had 20/20 vision and excellent health and everything. So they're pretty choosy about who they took.
Yes.
I was lucky. I had 20/20 vision. So
yeah.
And guys that had 20/30, 20/40, they could go to maybe navigator school, but not pilot school. So that's the way it went. And after that, I got assigned to a pilot training base. And all the guys in my training class there got dispersed to different training bases, which they had about 9 different bases to train pilots then.
I see.
A lot of them aren't there anymore because they closed down a lot of the military installations back in the, 90s. Seems like this is the mid-90s or something. A lot of them closed.
Yeah.
My base is still there, but it's not a training base anymore. It's Valdosta, Georgia.
What was it like when you shipped over or crossing to Vietnam?
Well, first of all, I had to go through pilot training and get assigned to a squadron. And since I got an A7, which you're looking at here, since I was awarded that, I went to a base in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, called Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. And they were deploying A7s over to Thailand at the time. But I had to go get A7 training first. In pilot training, they train you in 2 jets. The T-37, have you heard of that?
The
airplane?
Texan?
T-37?
Is that a propeller aircraft?
No, they're both jets.
Oh, I have not.
It's well, I don't know what it was made by Cessna. It's a twin engine, but the engines were right at the wing roots, the roots of the wing, and it was a side-by-side seating with a big white canopy, and the pilot and the instructor sit side by side in it. And I forget what the name they called the airplane, but it was the first jet trainer. It was a good little trainer, straight wings. And then when you got out of that one, you graduated to the supersonic T-38.
Okay.
Now you may have heard of that airplane as an F-5.
I think I have. Yes.
Okay. Well, that F-5 is the fighter version of the T-38, which had a tandem seating, front and back, two-seater. And that was an exciting airplane to fly because when you landed, you were doing 155 knots.
Wow. And were you training for carrier landings?
No, not at that stage. That was the Air Force, and we didn't train for carrier landings. But we did. Yeah. Yeah, we did have to. You had to be up to speed to do everything right at that fast because everything happens so quick.
Yes.
But once you get it, it's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
So after that, then after you get your pilot wings, then they assign you to your functional operational squadron. Now some guys went to B-52s, some went to C-130s, some went to tankers, KC-135s, and some went back into training, and maybe some other types of airplanes too. But fighters, you had to go to, well, whatever airplane you went to, you had to go to train in that airplane now because you had basic pilot knowledge, but you didn't know how to fly that particular airplane. And I'll tell you this, when I was flying a basic airplane, do you know much about airplanes?
I do. I've learned quite a bit.
Well, it's, maybe you get to fly someday. I hope you do.
Yeah, I would like to get a pilot's license.
Yeah, because basic airplanes is just an attitude indicator, altimeter, and airspeed, But in a fighter like the A-7 that's behind me here, it has 1,000 different switches and dials and stuff inside of it that you've got to master them before you can fly it. And when I was in pilot training, I looked inside of one of those cockpits and I said, how do you ever know how to operate all these switches and everything? Yeah. It was pretty awesome. I mean, so anyway, I eventually got in that airplane and to learn how to do all that stuff by yourself because you're a single pilot, so you got to do everything.
Yes.
You don't have a co-pilot. So that training took me another year to get through it. So I got through that, and in the early part of 73, my squadron at Myrtle Beach was deploying to Thailand, and so what they did, they were taking the whole squadron, and all the airplanes were already over there, and they were just exchanging pilots. Like the pilots would fly over, and the other pilots would fly home, and so we had the whole squadron deploy, and they flew a C-141, which was a big cargo airplane. It was all seated with seats in it instead of cargo for jeeps and tanks and what have you. So our whole squadron got in that with all our gear packed in there and everything, and we flew from South Carolina to Alaska, refueled, flew to Tokyo, spent the night, and we flew from Tokyo to Saigon, and then from Saigon over to a base called Korat, K-O-R-A, Korat, Thailand. There's about 5 different bases in Thailand, and that was the one that had the A-7s and F-4s. And so we ended up there, a couple days later after that trip. And then you had to go through your indoctrination.
What's that?
So there was a lot of indoctrination they had to put you through. Anyway.
What was your first combat mission like? what was going through your head at the time and everything?
Just before I said that, one of the things we had to do was get jungle survival training.
Oh.
So the new guys in my squadron, like myself, half a dozen of us, we had to fly over to the Philippines. And we went through a couple weeks of survival school in jungle. They taught us about the snakes and learned how to use a machete or, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then we went back and we could fly our mission. So back to the first mission, I was assigned to fly with my flight commander. He's the head of his group. I think the Army has a little different. The Army has they don't call him a flight. They call him a platoon.
Platoon leader. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the same as a flight leader. Flight commander.
Okay.
So yeah, he was in charge of about a dozen of us, or maybe 8 or 10. But anyway, I went with him. We loaded our airplanes up. You have to check all your bombs, and you arm your bombs before you climb in and make sure the pins come out. In the front of the bombs, they got a little propeller on them. And that propeller, when it's going through the air, it spins and it arms your warhead. It blows the bombs. See? So if that pin isn't pulled, that little prop won't spin, and your bombs, you can drop them, but they won't
explode.
So you got to make sure they're armed. And so we got that. And I mean, it wasn't scary, primarily, I'll tell you, because as opposed to World War II, we did not have a big anti-aircraft threat.
Okay.
So we were just flying into Cambodia, and we weren't flying into North Vietnam. My predecessors that were doing the same thing here had been going into North Vietnam, where there was missiles being fired at them and anti-aircraft guns, and some of them got shot down. But by the time I got there, it was the very tail end of the war, so it wasn't as intense, I'll admit, for me as it was for the guys earlier. So we were fighting ground support war. In other words, we were helping the Cambodians fight off the Khmer Rouge, which was the insurgents, the communist insurgents that were trying to take over Cambodia. And Cambodians were our friends, and they were, just kind of like the tail end of the South Vietnam War. And so we were winding down, so we were just supporting those troops then. We took bombs over and bombed, the enemy that was fighting the friendlies. We call them, the friendlies.
Yes. Did you ever get into any sort of dogfights?
No, I would have loved that, because that was something I really liked doing. We practiced that a lot. But no, we never had any enemy aircraft confront us. I did see some tracers coming at me from the ground. 1 or 2 missions,
yes.
But that's about all. I didn't, we didn't have any air threat.
Okay.
Didn't have any missile threat either. So I'm not a good one to interview in that respect, because I don't have any hair-raising stories to tell you.
I love hearing, anyways, your entire experience. I'm really grateful for you letting me talk to you, sir.
Well, is there anything else I could talk to you about?
Yes. So, let's see. All right. How are the interactions with the local Vietnamese civilians or the people from Thailand when you were stationed over there?
The Thai people were very friendly, and we really liked them. I like the Thai people a lot. They're happy-go-lucky people.
Yeah. Unlike
the Chinese, are very businesslike and stern, but
yes.
The Thais are very friendly. It's like comparing Mexican people to Germans. Mexicans are easygoing and friendly, and the Germans are all business.
Yes.
So there's Chinese businessmen in Thailand, and that's how I know. So the people we dealt with were pretty friendly, and some of my friends also that went over to Cambodia. I had friends in Cambodia that were fighter pilots over there that were fighting their own war against the insurgency. But I can't tell you any more about the Vietnamese because I didn't spend any time in Vietnam, actually.
And what would you do in your free time between missions?
Well, besides just going to the officers' club and drinking at the bar, quite often, we had a swimming pool. We could swim on our time off. Sometimes we'd go out and fly a month mission at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we get back. I worked out a lot, and I did some bodybuilding, and I had another pilot friend that was really into it, and he taught me a lot about lifting weights and getting in shape. And that was a good time because I was at a good age. When you're in your 20s, you can really develop your body pretty well. It's a good time to put on some muscle if you'd like to be strong and agile and fast and whatever. But the other thing that I did that was really exciting is I bought a nice camera. Back then it was called the single lens reflex, an SLR, and it was had direct photography. And they had in the military they have hobby shops. Have you ever heard of that?
Somewhat. Could you explain it?
Well, the military bases in the stateside, they have hobby shops. They have an auto shops all fully equipped that you can take your car in. You're going to work on your car, you can take it in, you can weld on it, you can change the brakes and so on. They got hobby shops of other things too. The one I had was a photography hobby shop. And so I took advantage of it, and I learned how to develop film.
Oh.
They have places where you can, take your film into the dark room and develop it, make slides or prints, whatever. And that was really a good educational thing for me.
Do you still have your pictures with you?
Oh yeah, I got photographs from over there.
How did you keep in contact with family while overseas?
Well, you could mail letters, but they didn't go very fast. It took a week or two.
Yeah. How often would you write home?
Oh, I'm not a very good writer. I was over there for 6 months before I could come home, and then I went back again for another 6 months. But in that 6 month period, I probably only wrote maybe 4 or 5 times. Probably not even once a month.
Wow. So, were there any particularly memorable experiences or significant moments while you were that you experienced during?
Well, I went to another Air Force base where a classmate of mine from pilot training was flying in a OV-10. Now that's a FAC airplane, forward air controller, and he carries white phosphorus rockets, and he's the one that fires these little rockets, and marks the spot where the enemy is located so that fighters can drop their bombs. Well, I got to ride with him and see it from his standpoint. And so what happens is they call in your friendlies on the ground call for an airstrike, and he's there and he talks to them, and then he calls in the fighters. And when you come in a fighter, then he rolls in and he shoots a rocket designating the place where the enemy is located so they can bomb them. And I got to ride in his back seat with him. So he let me fire some rockets, and I got to fly around right down close because the forward air controllers operate very close to the ground.
Wow.
And that was pretty memorable. And it wasn't my airplane, but it was something. Then when we went home, we actually flew past a world historic site called Angkor Wat.
I've heard it, yes.
It's an old temple in Cambodia.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of it and seen pictures.
And it was, I got to see it right up close when we were flying back to the base.
Oh, wow. One of my final questions would be, how do you think the Vietnam War shaped your generation and the United States as a whole?
Well, when you're in the military, you kind of just do as you're told, and you don't. I mean, you can have opinions, I suppose, but it was after the war when I decided it was a pretty stupid war, and I willingly went over there and did everything, and shot the gun and dropped bombs and ruined people's lives, whatever. But we were fighting a war, and you don't make a distinction who the people are that you're killing or wasting their homes and all this stuff. But afterwards, I thought poorly of all that, and it seemed like a vicious circle. The enemy comes in and makes their home in a little community and has all their armament, and then we get word that they've got armament in that community, and then we come in and bomb the community to take the armament away from the enemy. I mean, it was just silly. Yeah. But that's what war is, and that's why people should hate war.
Yes.
And I think the other thing that happened at that time was, you're aware right now that people all say thank a veteran, and thank you for your service and all this. Well, back then it was they spit on you. That your corresponding citizens back home were like, against you so much. I mean, some of the poor guys that I knew, they come back, they couldn't get a date with girls because we all had short hair, and they would talk to them because they were, baby killers, so to speak. And so that was a tough time in that respect, because we were doing the dirty work and we were getting respect for it. It wasn't our choice. All I hope is that there's a remembrance of that. I was a little disappointed when George Bush went in and attacked Iraq, at least the second time, the son, because I'm thinking, it just gets you ingrained in a war you can't get out of.
Yeah.
And I don't know why people in the political hierarchy don't understand that better. I mean, maybe they're starting to now, but the lesson from Vietnam was lost on George Bush Jr., I think. If I'd been president, then I would have never gone into Iraq like that.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, that's the best I can tell you from my perspective. How it shaped America, I don't know. People kind of forgot about it eventually, I guess. It just, every time there's a war, I'm just asking myself, don't the people that enter into this, don't they think about the long view of this? It never turns out good.
Yeah, that's a very good response. Thank you. How is it for you when you returned to the United States?
Well, I was in the military community, so I was somewhat isolated from all that. Unlike the Army guys, the Army privates and corporals that are, they're single, they want to get out and mingle with girls. I was an officer, and so it was a little different from my perspective. But I stayed mostly on the base and fraternized with my friends on the base. But I didn't find anything bad. Back in the South, I tell you, back then, even in the South, like South Carolina, Georgia, and those areas, they were very pro-military and pro-Vietnam. They didn't hold a lot of heartburn against us for being in the military. So that was good for us. That's where I was located at that time.
Well, the question would be, what was your call sign as a pilot? Just out of curiosity.
We were not given tricky call signs
No.
like the Navy is saying.
Okay.
We were given computer assigned call sign where I was, and they were just arbitrary names. They didn't have any meaning.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember. I had a call sign which I didn't like. No, but like I said, it was assigned. It wasn't like you're given a Maverick or something. That doesn't happen much. Anyway, it wasn't anything memorable.
Okay. Was there any specific like slang at the time? Like I've heard that GIs would call the United States the world, like you're going back to the world, or ROPs.
One term we had in our unit was we called what we were doing the Southeast Asia War Games.
Okay.
And you hear, they have war games. The Army, Navy, and Air Force, they play, practice games, attacking and defending. And so stateside, we have war games that we do on to practice. Well, we call that the Southeast Asia War Games probably because of the threat we were flying under. We dropped a lot of bombs on supposed targets, and we got told we killed so many people, but the numbers were always inflated because the commanders on the ground there knew that the more success we had killing the enemy, the more attention they get. So we laughed about it all. But, we were serious about doing our jobs right. When we said take out that compound there, we took it out, But it's still, we call them the Southeast Asia War Games.
And did the music of the time have any influence on the culture overseas? Like, I know there were lots of big bands like the Animals.
Yeah, we had some, I can't remember all the bands. One song I remember is Deep Purple. I can't remember the band that played it, but here's the funny thing is the Filipinos had bands that they could imitate the American bands so well. They're really good at it. And that song sticks out in my mind because the Filipino bands really played it well. And even some Thai bands, Thai guys, they're okay too. But Filipinos, we noted, imitated a lot of the songs that were popular by American and British artists.
And probably my last question would be, how was it reintegrating to civilian life again? Was it difficult for you?
No, it wasn't difficult for me. Again, I was an officer and probably a little different than it is for enlisted men. But when I got out of the Air Force, I had a job as a pilot with Continental Airlines. Okay. So I went right to an airline pilot job. And so that was not hard. It wasn't any tough transition for me. They were carrying, a rifle in the Army or working on tanks. When they got out, they had to learn a new skill of some kind. And so it was easy for me. I can't say it was difficult.
I see. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. I really appreciate you